mention the word immigration, and we almost reflexively think of illegal immigration. But in our country, we have had for years a tradition of temporary migrant immigration called migrant workers. And how does the migrant immigration system work? Well, stay tuned to hear how one church was directly involved in the migrant worker program. Hello, and welcome to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours, a place to discuss stories the mainstream media ignores that can actually impact our Christian walk and our spiritual journey. Chaplain Warren and Chaplain Nan are your hosts, and we're glad to have you with us. This is our fourth and last episode in our podcast series on immigration, politics, and the church. We will leave links to our previous 3 episodes in our show notes. Today's episode will be about a personal experience we had as church planters with some migrant workers, their employer, and the Roman Catholic Church. In all the discussions about immigration and illegal immigrants, it's pretty easy to forget that our country does have a tradition of hosting legal migrant workers for specific reasons and for specific periods of time. The start of our story is when we planted an Anglican church in Long Beach, Mississippi in 2011. In this podcast, we'll tell the story of how we became a church for a group of legal migrant workers when the local Roman Catholic diocese was apparently unable to work with them. And I think maybe the best place to start this story is for Chaplain Nan to tell us how she came across this group of workers one day.
Okay, Holy Spirit, be here. Tell us a story. So, my background is case management and a lot of training in the healing ministry and 12-step recovery work with people who are in recovery or trying to be in recovery. Anyhow, and so I was kind of like in a lull and really being prayerful about what God wanted me to do. And I had a job working as a case manager for adult services down in another city. And so every day I would travel this route to get home and back and forth from work. And it was the beautiful Gulf Coast, and so I could drive along the beautiful Highway 90 where you can see the beautiful beach and the sand, and it's gorgeous. But there's a shortcut, and it's the street behind the beautiful sandy beach highway. And I started taking that, and every day, I think it was every day. Anyhow, I would pass it frequently, was this big, it looked like a warehouse. And as I got to, for some reason, I started paying attention. Maybe it was a sign. I don't know. I can't really recall. Forgive me. I don't have a memory bank of what made me notice it. But it turns out it was a plant where the fishermen who fish on the Gulf Coast would harvest oysters. And so it was an oyster shucking, harvesting, canning plant, a fairly large one. So if you get your oysters on a half shell at a restaurant, it's likely it comes from this plant. And anyhow, so as I passed it back and forth, I don't know how it struck me was that there were workers there who might be Spanish speaking, as I am Spanish speaking a little bit. Anyhow, so I was just really being prayerful about how to be of service or something I could do for the Lord or something I could do with what I knew how to do. And one day it occurred to me, maybe we could bring healing service or just offer if there were people that needed 12-step work, who spoke Spanish, or just anybody who was like really hardworking, who maybe didn't have time to go to a place for help, that maybe we could come to the plant to help and just see if anybody needed somebody to talk to, sort of like pastoral care on an industrial or in a business universe. And that's kind of, I prayed about it and was very nervous because I'm pretty bold, but for some reason I had a lot of nerves about how to approach this because it was kind of an out-of-the-box thought. I think I talked to you about it quite a bit first, and we prayed about it, and then one day I got dressed and said my prayers and asked for guidance and pulled up into the parking lot and just walked in and did like a cold call, and I just walked in and the little front desk people were like, "Who are you?" And I was like, "Is the owner here?" Anyhow, long and short of it, I felt like it was a very awkward conversation, but my inquiry was, do the people who work here have like a deacon from the Catholic Church or any church come and offer pastoral care or any kind of services to the workers there? And she told me that many years before they had a Catholic priest that was, I think, offering them some sort of, attention, but that they hadn't had anybody for years. So with that, I was like thrilled. I got all excited. I was like, bingo. So I went home and told you about it, and then we found out that they were interested. The owners and the management was very interested, as if anybody's listening who works in the business world, that pastoral care at a location, at the site from ministry, is quite helpful because your employees are getting the attention they need there, so they don't have to take time off to go deal with whatever's going on with them. Anyhow, so that's kind of how we started, and we got in touch with the supervisor. Well, the owners told us who to get in touch with, who was the supervisor, and the supervisor was quite amazingly, high energy, on the ball, very open to what we were trying to do to see how we could be of service to what turned out to be a lot of workers who worked extraordinarily hard.
I might add legal migrant workers.
So when I went there, this was a while ago, before that was on the radar of legal, illegal. It was just people who came to do hard work, and that was where I was coming from, and I happened to, like I said, speak a little Spanish. So is there anybody there who maybe would be more comfortable praying or talking about whatever's going on with them, getting some pastoral care in their own, their home language? So that's how it started. And then as we started getting to know them, then we found out about this whole system in place for employment when you're from another country. And the next step from there was that, I really wanted to hear from the people who worked there, from the employees, what they felt their need was, right? So I didn't want to come and sell them something they didn't need or offer a service they weren't interested in. I wanted to know what their need was, what their pastoral need was. And so the next step was we arranged to go to the site where they provide housing for them, and it was a pretty big,
Yeah, probably about 10 acres of land.
So it's a lot of people that come and they work during the season of the oysters, it's seasonal. But it was a lot of people. And so we went, and again, another nervous thing, like a little, awkward, just praying for the Holy Spirit to guide us. And so we went bravely and just knocked on the door of a trailer where they told us to go. And there were some very, just warm and friendly, beautiful people who welcomed us in. And we sat there and just chatted with them for a while and heard from them. They had been working there for years, coming to work there for years. So they weren't like, people who didn't know the place or the employer or the community there. And they told us the story of how over time their ability to get liturgical services, to go to Mass, to receive pastoral care, to get the sacraments, to even have somebody to talk to, over time it really dwindled. And I would imagine it's because over time the church's priests and deacons were so far stretched because they were so short-handed for very huge parishes. So they kind of got lost in the net, and I felt like, okay, Lord, here we are, we can do it. We can be the fill-in substitute teachers, if you will. And that's kind of how we got started, and I'll let you take it from there.
So this was an interesting setup that this company had put together in order to comply with the requirements of the temporary migrant worker program. They had set up about trailers, full-size trailers on a piece of land, about 10 acres, about 12 to 15 miles north of Gulfport, Mississippi. And then the workers they had company vans, and they would drive to work early in the morning. They'd work 12-hour days, and then they'd come back in the evening. And so this first meeting Chaplain Nan was talking about was at this trailer park. After that meeting, that led to the conclusion of that meeting led to the offer of what I'd call an intercessory prayer time for the workers. And so we showed up, I think it was on a Sunday afternoon. It was
Sunday afternoon
beautiful.
when they were off.
Yeah, when they were off from work. They typically work 6 days a week. And probably about 3 in the afternoon or something like that. And the foreman, the supervisor, he went around and corralled everybody, and about 60 or so people lined up single file in front of Chaplain Nan, because she spoke Spanish. I didn't, still don't. And she prayed. She stood there for a couple of hours and prayed for them one by one. They would tell her their intercession, their need, and she would pray for each one of them. And I mean, for about 2 hours that went on. And when it was over, they went back to their trailers. We packed up and went back home. It was a success. And so the next step was we actually invited them to come over to our church in Long Beach. And I guess, again, this must have been a Sunday afternoon, because that would have been their day off. And about, I'd say 15 or 20 of them came in one of the company vans, or maybe it's both vans, and came to the meeting. And so it was just a back and forth conversation on, again, what they needed, what they hoped for, what they wanted. One of them, I remember, pointedly chided me because I didn't speak Spanish. I apologized and tried to explain to him that languages were not my strong suit, but I understood his concern. So I think we met with them 1 or 2 other times, and then we invited them to come to our principal Christmas Eve service, 8 o'clock on Saturday evening, December the 24th. And about 20 of them came. And
I mean, did the Holy Spirit show up? It was a most moving. I wish we had the ability to communicate to those of you listening what happened. It wasn't like people were speaking in tongues and all. It was just such a intensely holy time between 2 completely different speaking people coming to worship the Lord Jesus Christ and to honor his birth.
So some of them spoke a fair amount of English.
I mean, it's not like...
Most of them probably understood a little bit of English, and we didn't have enough chairs, and so actually many of them stood up during the Mass, but We did the Mass. We did the reading. Our chaplain Nan did the readings in Spanish. We did the Eucharistic. We did the words of consecration in the Eucharistic prayer in Spanish, and they came up along with our regular parishioners and had communion. And we have a group picture with them after the Mass, and for those who might be looking or listening to this on YouTube, that picture should be showing right now to show you some of the people who were there.
So one of the things for me that was like a lesson I learned a long time ago, I guess in seminary, I don't remember where I was when I learned a lesson. It was a powerful one I'd like to share, and that is we can all learn another language, as Father Warren worked very diligently, and I mean hours he spent learning doing something that's difficult for him, and that was to learn another language, just so he could speak in another language and consecrate the Eucharist and say Mass. But what I learned was we had a visiting priest, I believe it was, and he had us English-speaking people. He was trying to explain why, because a lot of people get real upset about, like, well, it's the United States, everybody should speak English and let everybody learn. And that is correct. We should definitely assimilate and integrate. We are the United States, and we have the language called English. But when you're praying, and he wanted to have us understand what that's like, when you're praying, when you're really in prayer with the Lord, it's almost invariable that you're going to do it in your native tongue. You're going to, in particular, a small thing like the Our Father. And so he handed out a page, and he had us read the Our Father. It was written in French, and we had to say the Our Father, reading what was written in French, say it out loud, and at the same time try and be prayerful. And it's almost impossible to do that because your mind wants to go to your native language as you're speaking to the Lord. And so I always remember that. And so I'm making this little interjection to make the point about why, not just to be respectful, to let people feel welcome and invited, and to let them have a sacred time with the Lord, but also how to facilitate that until English is their fluent language and they can pray and it comes naturally, which it does after time. For those who didn't, they were able to be present with the Lord. That was the important thing for us, was that both languages, or however many languages, that everybody can be with the Lord in their prayer time as a community, as we celebrated the Eucharist. So anyhow, that's my little sidebar.
So as we moved on from Christmas Eve, we started going out to their trailer park one Sunday a month to do Mass. And we called it Mass in the Field, because we literally set up a portable table to be the altar with candles, with the chalice and the paten and the ciborium and all the liturgical stuff, and in our vestments, standing out in a field. And there was a fence behind us, and on the other side of the fence there were usually 4 or 5 cows or cattle watching us do Mass in the field. And most times it was hot and humid. Sometimes it would start raining, and so we'd have to hurry it up. But we did that for a season, really from about February through the end of April, when it was time for the migrant workers to go back to Mexico because the oyster season was over. When they came back in the fall, which they would usually come back in the early to mid part of October as oyster season was starting, when they came back, we had a meeting with them, and they wondered if it would be possible to have some kind of a chapel
to get them out of the field.
Yeah, to get out of the field.
They would stand the entire time. They would stand after standing.
Yeah, and there were mosquitoes out there. And so anyway, we talked about that. And so my first thought about that was to see if there was a local school or church or something that we could get some space in. And it turned out there was a Roman Catholic church about 3 miles north from there. And I went up and met with the priest at the church, told him the story, and he was very sympathetic, very nice guy. And he said, well, he didn't think they did have an office building with a couple of conference rooms, classrooms, but he didn't think that would really work out. But he had a chapel building about 3 miles away. And so we got in his car and he drove me out to the chapel building. It was not being used. It belonged to the diocese, the Roman Catholic diocese. It wasn't being used, but it was maintained. And it was absolutely beautiful inside. It was kind of small, 30 to 40 people would have been a capacity crowd. And he said, would this work? And I said, well, it'd be great. I mean, it was just beautiful. So he said he would check with the diocese and see if we could use it since it wasn't being used. Well, he called me back a couple of weeks later and he said, well, I've got some bad news. And I said, well, I was kind of ready for that the diocese just couldn't, that was a leap too far for the diocese to let an Anglican church use a Roman Catholic diocese. And so I said, well, thank you, appreciate that. And so we told the migrant workers, our congregation, about this, and they asked, well, could we build a chapel on the trailer park grounds? And I said, well, we'll think about that. And so after thinking about it a little bit, we thought, well, maybe we could build one of those cheap buildings that you can get online where, people use them for carports, they use them for little shops, that type of thing. And maybe we could outfit that as a chapel. So we went to see the owners of the oyster plant since it was their land, and they said, yeah, that'd be great. They certainly, if we could build the chapel there, they were certainly in favor of it. And in fact, they would donate the concrete to pour a concrete pad to build the building on. And so we contracted with a company that builds these metal buildings and figured out that the cost was going to be about, at that time, $5,500. The pad or the building, lumber to finish off the building, to build benches and things like that for people to sit on during Mass and everything, $5,500. So we started fundraising, talking to other churches in our Anglican diocese, talking to people we knew, things like that. And after a couple of months, we ended up with $5,550. I mean, almost precisely what we needed. So we contracted with the concrete company. Several of the workers at the oyster plant had construction experience, so they built the forms for the concrete pad. They laid the gravel in the pad. And
they
then
took ownership of that was their chapel.
Yes, exactly. And Chaplain Nan came up with this beautiful idea to have the workers at the oyster plant get some discarded oyster shells and to write their names in the oyster shells and the names of their families back in Mexico and any prayer intentions in the oyster shells with magic markers. And we dumped the oyster shells into the form before the concrete was poured so that they would be there forever. So we poured the concrete, it cured, the metal company came out and built the building. Home Depot delivered a bunch of lumber for us, and all of us, the workers, after they got off work on a Saturday one day, we did all the finish out work for the building. We built the benches for people to sit on. And then a couple of workers who had some time off helped me one day to build a sanctuary area in the building where the altar would sit. One of our parishioners in our main congregation built an altar, a wood altar for us, and shortly after that, in 2013, we had the first and I found a bell on eBay that I could mount up on a pole and put a rope on it, and then
like
ring
the church bell,
ring the bell
it's
for
time
Mass. And so we started doing Mass in the chapel. And there was one young gentleman who didn't speak much English, but had a beautiful voice. He would do the scripture readings, and by that time I had learned enough Spanish to actually say the Mass in Spanish with the help of a YouTube video. And I even learned enough to be able to preach a little bit in Spanish, and
did a mighty fine job.
and that's where we went. So we once a month we were having Mass in the chapel. Typically 30 to 40 people would show up out of a total population out there of 60 or 70. And it was a holy time.
Yes, and then after Mass, we would sort of talk to them, and anybody that had special things they wanted to talk about, we would just go off to the side, and people would, depart and kind of get some privacy and just let them have a little bit of pastoral care, because it's a hard thing to be. It's like a deployment. They deploy, they leave their families, they leave their homes, they leave their, parents get sick or somebody has an accident, and they're like far away, and all kinds of things that life brings. And so they work, like Father Warren said, at least 12-hour days, and it is hard physical work. And they're paid mightily well, and that's part of this whole visa thing, was they were able to come and make a really good amount of money legally, pay taxes, the whole 9 yards, and then go back to their families. And but anyhow, so we provided spiritual pastoral care as best we could in the interim of doing masses, which brings us to Ash Wednesday.
Yes, and so the last year we were there, we came up to Ash Wednesday, and we were we felt like we needed to do something for them on Ash Wednesday, but weren't quite clear how to do it. At that time of the year, they didn't get off work till after dark. We did not have electricity in the chapel, so no lights. And I don't know how we came up with the idea, but we just showed up at the oyster plant on Wednesday.
Yeah, the owners were really great to help us, to just be so, hospitable, and they embraced what we were trying to do to help their employees. So anything we asked, they were very, they really bent over backwards to facilitate. So when we showed up, they were like, oh yeah, because there were also the Vietnamese community, a lot of workers were there too, who are Roman Catholic, and so a lot of them weren't able to get off of work to go to church to get ashes.
So we showed up, and we asked the owners, could we maybe stand out on the loading dock and distribute ashes to anyone that wanted them. And they said, "Oh, go right into the factory. We'll call a break time. We'll stop work, and you can just stand right there, and they can line up and get ashes if they want." And so it was a surreal experience to have everybody stop work. The conveyor belts stopped. Everything stopped. And I'm standing about ankle deep in seawater from where the oysters are washed in my vestments. And people over 100 people, for as far as I could see in this building, were lined up for ashes. And those who spoke English, I gave them ashes in English. For those in Spanish, I'd memorized how to do it in Spanish. And for the Vietnamese, they either got English or Spanish, whatever came out of my lips at that time. But for over an hour, we distributed ashes to everybody in that plant.
It was a super sacred moment.
It really was.
Their faces. I mean, one thing is when you go up, for those of you who will go up to the clergy for a sacrament or a special moment, and you're in a reverent position. The other thing is to see the person coming up to you becoming so reverent in that sacred moment for them, where time just kind of stood still, and it was like just God was so present. It was just such a amazing, kind of like the Christmas service. It was just a sacred time. seeing their little faces and their sincerity and coming not to us but to the Lord to commemorate the beginning of Lent. And to, feel so glad that we were able to provide something that was like a win-win, because it was a win for the employer, because I'm sure their employees were in better moods knowing they had, done their religious tradition or duty or whatever, however they saw it. But for the people to have that moment, that sacred moment in the midst of everything, it was just a beautiful thing. And all that because
we knew they needed it, and we were searching for a way to provide what they needed.
So as you're speaking, I was trying to find words. I'm at a loss for words, because I was recalling at the Christmas service that we did, where we combined the English with the Spanish. It was so beautiful because Father Warren, we decided to do after post-communion hymn was Silent Night, which is just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Christmas song or hymn. And we dimmed the lights and everybody had candles, and we had, well, not dimmed the lights, we had handouts of the Silent Night in Spanish and the Silent Night in English. And it was so beautiful because it was like what I imagine it is for God to hear us all at the same time in all our different languages. We were singing this beautiful song in perfect harmony in 2 different languages, and it was just such a moving moment that I wanted to share it with you. Like I said, it's so hard to convey the moment, but it brought to mind the saying from the movie, and you guys will know the movie I'm talking about, build it and they will come. And so pull over, be a disciple, and there's people who have a need and you can fill it. That to me was like God will open the door to take care of his little sheep. And so we were so honored, and it was such a blessing for us, but just such a beautiful thing to, by accident, I don't think so. By tapping on the shoulder spiritually, I believe, and by having a little bit of gumption to go knock on the door and say, how can we be of service?
So this went on for another year or so, and coming up to 2015, it was time for Chaplain Nan and I to move on for family reasons. And so as we were working through the process of disengaging from our parish, we were able to successfully work with the Roman Catholic Diocese to identify both a priest and a deacon who spoke Spanish and were willing to take on the congregation and the chapel that the good Lord had helped us build. And so we had a final Mass. This was on Easter Sunday of 2015, and it was sweet as well as sad as we hugged each other and prayed for each other, us for them and them for us. And we introduced the new clergy who would shepherd them, and off we went, and they've been in our prayers ever since. I think as we look back on the whole experience, and particularly as we look back on that experience maybe in the context of the present, where immigration is such a charged subject due to illegal immigration and how that's been abused, I think maybe the key lesson we learned from all that was that the guest worker migrant program is a terrific win-win program for everyone. The oyster company had no problem maintaining a sustainable and proven workforce in these folks who migrated up from Mexico in the fall and left in the spring. The folks who came year after year worked hard earned a good bit of money, which they could send back to their families in Mexico. The local economy certainly benefited from the oyster plant's presence, and these 70 to 80 workers who bought groceries, bought cars, bought other things to use as they lived in the past Christian area. And I think, in a bigger sense, our country was well served by that program. And certainly the country of Mexico was well served by that program. And so, not trying to be political, but I would be an eager advocate for the expansion of this temporary migrant worker program, so to fulfill the needs of American companies, but also to give opportunities to foreign workers who don't have those kinds of opportunities in their own land to come over here and work and earn the money, and possibly someday maybe decide to become legal immigrants and eventually citizens of the United States of America.
So the whole thing for us was started from a spiritual component and a desire to serve. And these days, our experience we wanted to share was the extraordinarily horrible setup we have right now. Why should somebody have, in order to work, have to come in like with coyotes and horrible things happening to you just so you can work, and then all the stuff that goes with it? And these are jobs that nobody's taken away from the citizens, American citizens. There were American citizens working there, plenty of them.
Yep.
But it was kind of like a coexisting, a nice fellowship of the way things are meant to be, I think, in the economy, in the business world. But the whole idea of being this type of visa makes it so that people, can come, and then they can go back home if that's that's their thing for them, without it having to be, a whole criminal enterprise, or for the owner of the business to have to, do all kinds of things they shouldn't do in order to get workers. And so all that to say is there's a better way, and this is just an example of one, which if anybody knows our president or our Secretary of State or somebody of influence, we're just a little drop of sand in the whole huge beach of sand, but it's an example of how things could be, and things, just imagine if that's how things were today, and that was the majority of the way it was happening. Anyhow, don't want to pontificate about that, but just want to spread the word that it's a beautiful thing for people to be able to, with their heads held up high, work hard, take care of their families, or whatever it is that they're doing, and then be able to not have to hide, and us not have to, do, be the bad guys in the situation. It's a peaceful thing. But the main thing was that the Lord let us provide services to people. I encourage anybody who feels a pull to do something. It doesn't have to be that kind of work. Just be brave and go knock on the door.
Yes, absolutely.
If Father Warren can learn Spanish and do a mass in Spanish, and trust me when I say it's harder for him to learn Spanish than it was for me to do remedial math 3 times, God can make anything possible if you're willing to be his servant.
Absolutely. We hope you've enjoyed this 4-part series on immigration, politics, and the church. And if you have any comments on any of our episodes or any other comments to offer, we'd love to have them. In the meantime, be blessed. Thank you for being with us today. Just remember, God is in control, and we know how the story ends.